Hi guys, it's Aoife from Words of Clover and I'm here to talk about my favourite books of 2022. So I happen to have a really good list of some books that I just either couldn't stop thinking about throughout the entire year, or some really good books that I read at the end of last year that I just know are probably going to be all-time favourites and books that I would really love to reread in the future. So these are my top reads of 2022. The first book I want to talk about is a book I originally listened to an audiobook, and I have since bought a physical copy of this book because I know I want to reread it in the future, and I've been talking about it all year basically since I originally read it, and that is Snowflake by Louise Nealon. This is a book that is very similar to stories that we have previously read from, say, Sally Rooney and Nisha Dolan, and it's looking at a girl who is from kind of the countryside in Ireland, and she's in that period between where she's just finished secondary school and she's going into her first year in college, and she's kind of for the first time kind of stepping out of the world that she's grown up in and like into a whole brand new world that is completely foreign to her. She's meeting new people, she's in new kind of scenarios, and she's really kind of starting to that struggle of finding yourself and kind of exploring yourself and doing a lot of bad things to eventually be the stronger person that you will eventually become in your like adult life. And I just absolutely loved this. I just loved how it showed this transitional phase between being a teenager and being an adult so well. The main stars of this book as well are some of the side characters. In particular, the main character Debbie has an uncle called Billy who runs the dairy farm that her family own, and he is just absolutely wonderful. He's kind of like her father figure in her life, and I just absolutely love the conversations they had together, kind of from the time she was young up until the point where she is in her early 20s, and he's teaching her to drive and all of this. And we're seeing kind of family trauma as well, and as I said, mental health problems as well with her mother. Her mother is suffering from, I think her mother maybe has bipolar disorder, and we see that, and we see Debbie struggling to look after her mother as well. But yeah, there's just so much in this book that I think is so good. I can't stop thinking about it, and yeah, it's just one that I would urge everyone to read because I just think it is a hidden gem. And I am I keep checking Louise Nealon's Twitter to see if she's coming out with a new book soon, because I just can't wait to read whatever she comes out with next, because I just love this one so much. The next book I read was a book club read, and that was Miss Benson's Beetle, Rachel Joyce. This is a really kind of fun, quirky historical fiction book where we are following a woman called Miss Benson, who is an older woman. I guess she'd be like a spinster woman, and she kind of one day gets tired of just living her same boring life teaching in this school where like the students are horrible, no one treats her very well, and she walks out one day and decides that she's finally going to try and achieve her lifelong dream, which is to go to a place called New Caledonia and try and find this particular type of beetle that everyone thinks doesn't exist, and she wants to be the one to prove that this beetle does exist. So she ends up like getting things organized to go on this big trip, and she employs this assistant that ends up being someone completely different to who she thought they would be, and is a little bit ridiculous and not really suited to be an assistant. But the two women end up kind of forging this friendship as they travel the world and start on this exploration to find this beetle. And I just thought this was so good. It was, you know, just whimsical and funny and lighthearted, and there were times where like the two characters could like be a little bit like caricatures, but I think this just added to the fun and to the light-hearted nature of the book as well. I just really enjoyed reading this, and it was just one book that like one of those type of books that just had me smiling throughout the entire thing. I still need to read more Rachel Joyce. I haven't done that yet, but I do want to, because her style of writing definitely just really is what I like to read. So yeah. The next book I want to talk about is a book I almost like read, I think, all in one go, and it's called Posh, and this is kind of like a domestic suspense type of book. I wouldn't say it's quite really thrillery, it's just a lot more suspense, because the entire book is just really about building up this tension. And because of this story, we are following a woman who is happily married, and her and her husband decide they want to have a child, and she's really nervous about having a child because her mother like didn't really do a good job being a mother, and her grandmother before her also was not a particularly good grandmother. So she has kind of a history in her family of the women not being particularly good or well suited to motherhood. So she's really nervous about having her first baby, and you know, I think she has a pretty hard pregnancy, and then the birth is really traumatic, and then obviously her time with the newborn is just, you know, horrendous, and then her husband is pretty useless and not very good at supporting her. But she gets through it. But then as her child, as her daughter gets older, the more like kind of, I guess, interactions she has with her daughter and the way she sees her daughter interacting with the world around her, she starts thinking there might be something wrong with her child, and her child seems to be like missing a certain empathy or a certain like, you know, just general kindness or human within her nature, and that's kind of like a little bit scary. And like she's genuinely like, is my child like maybe a sociopath or a psychopath? I don't know. And then obviously she's trying to talk to her husband about it, and he just is like gaslighting her and ignoring her, and you know, not talking, like not really like taking anything she says seriously. And we just see how the story progresses, and the whole time that we are reading the book, we're trying to figure out if everything is in the main character's head. Is she building this up, or are her fears like, is there something really true to her fears? Is there something wrong with this little girl, and is she a danger to those around her? And I just absolutely loved this. I thought the tension building was really, really great. I felt like really on the edge of my seat, waiting to see what would happen and see if anything would happen. And yeah, I just really, really enjoyed this. I know some people who haven't enjoyed this and have it on their worst books of the year, but I really, really love this one. My next favourite book of 2022 is a reread, and that is Persuasion by Jane Austen. This is a book where we are following a character called Anne Elliot, who is a little bit older than, I guess, some of Jane Austen's normal characters. I think she's in her late 20s, which would be very, like, particularly old to be an unmarried woman at this time. And when she was younger, she was in love with this man called Captain Wentworth, and they were engaged to be married, and then she ended up deciding not to marry him because she was persuaded by people in her family and family friends that their match wouldn't be good and she would be better off not marrying him. So she told him that she wouldn't marry him, and he went off, and ever since then she has kind of been mourning the life that she could have had, and she's really figured like, no, maybe she made the wrong decision, maybe she shouldn't have let herself be persuaded. And then one summer, I don't know whether it's the summer, but like one year, Captain Wentworth ends up coming back into society, and he starts courting some of the younger women in Anne's circles, and the two of them are kind of, I guess, circling around each other, in each other's lives again, but trying not to catch feelings for each other or, you know, rekindle those feelings, but they can't really help it. And we just see this lovely love story, kind of second chance romance happen. And I just really enjoyed this one. This was a reread. My first time reading it, I liked it, but then my second time reading it, I absolutely loved it. I think I just saw all the qualities in this book that as a younger reader, I don't think I saw, or like as an older woman now as well, like I'm in my early 30s, I think I just connected with Anne so much more than I would have when I was younger. And now I see a lot more of myself in Anne than I would in, say, Elizabeth Bennet in Pride and Prejudice, or Emma, or other characters like that. And then I just loved the letter. So there's this really famous letter in this book that Captain Wentworth writes to Anne, and I just absolutely loved reading that again, and I just found it so romantic. And yeah, I just had such a good time reading this book, and I absolutely loved it. So another book I absolutely loved was a non-fiction book, and that is The Book of Hope with Jane Goodall. So it's a conversation with Jane Goodall, and she is basically just talking about her kind of life as a naturalist and a conservationist, and she is talking about her feelings and hope, and how she feels that like where you can find hope in the world today. And as we look at our future as human beings in a world that is, you know, with climate change and you know, the politics of the world today and things that are happening, the rise of certain, you know, actions and politics and feelings in the world, how we can maintain the hope within ourselves and spread hope among others. And, you know, is there a future in the world even? She's kind of like asking or answering questions that a lot of people would have around the future of the world, and is there anything to be hopeful for? And I just absolutely love this one. I think Jane Goodall is an amazing woman. I really appreciated just being a part, as a reader, being a part of the conversation that she has in this book, around hope, around the things that like she has already experienced in her life and the things that she is hoping to see young people do. And like a lot of her thing that like her hope, there will always be hope because there will always be young people in the world who are inspired to try and change the world and to inspire others. And I just loved everything, the way she talked about it. I think this is a really like uplifting book, and I feel like a lot of books around the topic of the world or the environment or climate change and things like that can be really, really depressing, and I think this is the complete opposite to that. I think this is a really uplifting book. It's a book that makes you feel good about yourself, about humanity. It makes you, you know, think about humanity in different ways, and make you realise that there are so many good people in this world. We tend to see all the stories about all the bad people, but for every, I guess, bad action in the world, there are thousands and thousands of acts of kindness and people doing the very best that they can for other people and for the world, and for the environment. And we just have to kind of keep hold of that. So yeah, I absolutely love this book, and yeah, as I said, I think she's just an amazing woman, definitely one of my heroes. And yeah, I really love this. The book I loved is one that I've seen lots of other people enjoy as well, that I was so glad about, and that was Lessons in Chemistry. And this one I absolutely just devoured. This one is set in, I guess, it's like the late 1950s to the early 1960s, and we are following a female character called Elizabeth, who is basically like a genius, but at the time in history, she is a woman, and she is not taught, like, it's not thought that she could be anything like say like the male scientists in the world of sciences she wants to work in. She wants to you know, be able to just be in a lab and work on her own projects, and she's consistently undermined, she's underpaid, she's undervalued, and she's never listened to. All of her ideas are never really, people never really take her seriously. And we see her fall in love in this book and then have a child, and she ends up becoming a single mother, and this all kind of leads to, again, her being pushed out of like her place of work, and like, you know, treated really badly, and through a like series of events that really all comes down to her making a really good school lunch for her child one day. She ends up becoming the star of this like daytime TV cooking show, where she ends up, through the art of cooking, teaching all her female viewers about science, and also kind of pushing them to go and try and achieve their dreams and to think more about themselves, and they can do more than, you know, sit at home and look after their family. If they want to do more, they should be able to do that. And she kind of inspires loads and loads of others, while, you know, trying to figure out how to achieve her own dreams as a scientist as well. So yeah, I really love this one. I just loved the style of writing in it. There was lots of like really kind of like tough topics in this. Like there's a sexual assault very early on in this book that really took me by surprise, as I just wasn't really expecting it. And the whole book has almost like this light-hearted feel to it. So there are some actually like tougher topics that do take you a little bit by surprise as a reader, such as some sexual assault. There's a lot of gaslighting in this book, loads of just, you know, misogynistic behaviour that's really bad, and it's just really hard to see. But there's also loads of really great things. There's so many great characters and side characters. I loved the found family element in this book as well. I really enjoyed that. There's a dog character called 630 who is like one of my favourite characters of all time. I absolutely loved him. So yeah, I really enjoyed this book and would really urge other people to read it. I just had a really good time reading it, and I think that's always the main objective. Then I read Her Majesty's Royal Coven by Juno Dawson, and Juno Dawson she always writes a good book for me. She's definitely one of my auto-read authors. She's one of my favourite authors. I just always love the characters and the stories that she creates, and some of the things she discusses in her books. She has talked about like addiction before in some of her past books. She has talked about the Me Too movement in storylines as well, that I've always really enjoyed. And this is her first foray into adult writing, and I think she did such a good job. This is like an urban fantasy book, and we are following a group of characters who were all witches, and we know that years ago, I think when they were in like their late teens, early 20s, they were involved in this really big war against this kind of, I think he would be like a warlock who was like really evil. He was killing loads of people. He wanted to kind of like take over the world, and the four of them, alongside like a bunch of other witches and warlocks, were able to defeat him. But they were kind of like the core group that were able to defeat this guy. And now they're older, they're in like their 30s. A lot of them have I think two of them have children who are teenagers themselves. And we see how, you know, over the years things have changed for them. Like two of them are still like very much involved in like, I guess, witchy business, and then two of them have stepped away from witchy business and are just kind of living ordinary lives in the countryside. But then there is a prophecy that comes out that there's going to be another really big war, and then this teenager shows up who with these really powerful magic that is kind of scaring a lot of people, and then that teenager comes out as transgender, and we see this be a real kind of breaking point for some of the characters, in where some of the characters come out as pretty much really, really transphobic, and there's like this really big discussion in this book around like transphobia and turfdom, and yeah, just kind of like accepting people for who they are. And we see this really fracture the group, and we see how it affects them all, and we see some people make really, really bad decisions, and the fallout from that as well. I really, really enjoyed this one. I thought it was just such a good like first book. This book was written to try and heal some of the hearts that were broken when J.K. Rowling came out with her own views a few years ago, and I think this book was written as almost like, yeah, it kind of, I think it healed some bits in me that that I didn't even know I needed. But yeah, this, I absolutely love this. I love this one. The end of this book absolutely killed me, and I just cannot wait for the next book because it ends on such a cliffhanger. And yeah, I can't wait for the next book to see what happens. I'm kind of scared, but I also am very, very, very excited. So that's going to be coming out this year, and I cannot wait. And then another non-fiction book on this list is a book I read during non-fiction November, and it's called Walking Him Home. And this is a book that's all about a man who a husband and a wife, who the man when he's in it, I think he's in his 60s, he gets diagnosed with, I think, kind of a terminal illness. It's basically a terminal illness that over time just gets worse and worse and worse, and he starts losing kind of a lot of his ability to be able to live independently. And his wife is the one who is writing this book after he has died, and she's kind of talking about, you know, their early years together. They met when they were in like their late 40s maybe, and they were married for 20 years before his diagnosis, and just at the time that they were kind of retiring and looking forward to, you know, their years of a retired couple together, maybe traveling and just spending like all their time together, he ends up getting this diagnosis, and his wife ends up kind of becoming more or less his full-time carer. And this is all about his right to die with dignity. Medical aid in dying is the favorite term in this book, and he decides to go ahead with this. They live in Colorado, which is a state that allows this, and yeah, they just talk about their life together as his illness gets worse, and then eventually it leads up to his decision to decide to end his own life on his own terms, and, you know, surrounded by the people who love him. And I just absolutely loved everything about this book. I just thought it was written really well. It was so emotional. It was really heartfelt. I just thought Joanne did such a good job, like, talking about her husband Alan and what he went through. I thought she was so, like, brave herself, talking about her life as a carer, and like, you know, she obviously loved him and she wanted to care for him, but it wasn't a career choice that like she wanted. She was in her years where she was retired, she had already done her job, she had actually already cared for her ailing parents, who both ended up with dementia and living with her through the early years of Alan's diagnosis. And so she goes from caring for her parents with dementia until their death to then caring for her husband as he slowly dies. And it was just so sad, and I just felt so sorry for her, but I also just felt the strength that she shows again and again and again in this book was just so amazing, and I just really, really admired her for it. And yeah, I just absolutely loved and felt honoured to hear about how Alan chose to die, chose medical aid in dying, and how it all worked. He's able to say goodbye to all the people who meant something to him, and then, you know, be surrounded by people, go out on his own terms before he really lost everything that was dear to him. I just really, really enjoyed this one, and yeah, I was in bits by the end of it. I just thought it was just so good, and it just made me think about a lot of things that I've thought about before, but I haven't thought about, I guess, in depth around how I would feel that I think everyone has a right to have the decision in how they die. And I just think every country should have some sort of medical aid in dying, you know, option for people, where, you know, legally and medically there's steps towards being able to do it. And I just, yeah, I would really think that every country should have that, especially after reading this book. But I really, really enjoyed it. Then another book I loved was Half a Soul by Olivia Atwater, and this is kind of a urban fantasy Regency romance book in which we are following a young girl who, her name is Dora, and when she's younger she has like this I guess interaction with this fairy, this evil fairy, who ends up taking half of her soul. So she ends up growing up kind of living her, like feeling that she's living her life in this kind of like half dazed like demeanor, I guess, in a way. Like she's always kind of like on the same, like on this particular level that she's never able to feel any more than she is feeling at any moment. And then she ends up going to London with her cousin for her cousin's season, and she meets this man who is the Lord Sorcerer, who is kind of like the head magician at the time in England. And the two of them at first don't really like get along, but then he decides that he will help her like try and figure out how to maybe find the other half of her soul and fairy and figure out how to like stitch her back together. And she also helps him on like other projects that he's working on, and we see the two of them just, their friendship goes from kind of not really liking each other to friendship to eventual like romance and love. And I just loved the transition of this relationship. It was just so cute. This book is really, really cozy and lovely and just made me smile, and I just loved everything about this book, and I can't wait to read the other books in this series, which all follow, I think, kind of characters in the world or that have been introduced. And like this is like obviously the starting book, and then the other book kind of like, I think, like weave around this story in this book. But yeah, I really, really enjoyed it. And then my favourite book of the year, I don't think will be any surprise to anyone who has watched any of my videos in 2022. My favourite book of the year is obviously Trespasses by Louise Kennedy. I read this at I think it was the very end of March before the Irish Readathon, and basically nothing topped it. I've read lots of good books since this, but this is the book that I just keep coming back to again and again and again when I'm thinking about the best books that I've read. And if people are asking me what books I would recommend from what I have read, this is always it. I just absolutely loved it. I thought it was so good. And this is a book that is set in 1974, 1975, following a young woman called Kushla. She is a young primary school teacher, but she also works part-time in her family. Her family own this bar, and it's kind of unusual at the time. They're living like, I think, in the outskirts of Belfast. So obviously during the Troubles, there's a lot of, you know, like things going on, a lot of war and a lot of you know, unrest, bombings, shootings, just really unsafe times for everyone. And her family are kind of unusual in that they are Catholics and they own this bar, but a lot of their patrons are Protestants. So yeah, it's kind of like an unusual situation. And while she is working in this bar, she meets this man who is a local solicitor lawyer. His name is Michael, and he is a Protestant, but he's older and he's also married. And the two of them just like, there's a really strong connection between the two of them, and they start a relationship. And we see how this relationship is just kind of, it's like all encompassing and it's passionate, but it's like from the start it just feels really, really doomed, particularly with the like what's going on like around them at all times, and how being together is always like dangerous for the both of them. And we just see this relationship, and we also see other bits in Kushla's life as a primary school teacher as she tries to help some of the students in her class who are going through tough times. And then she also has situations going on at home with her mother, who is an alcoholic. And yeah, we just see her going through a lot. But the main focal point in the story is her relationship with Michael and how that's going to all end up. Yeah, I just really love the story. I just thought there was so much that was so captivating about it. I loved Kushla's character. I loved her relationship with Michael, and even though, as I said, it does feel doomed from the start, you just can't help but root for them and root for them to find somewhere safe for them to be together. This showed a really, really like violent point in Irish history. I think it portrayed it really, really well. Like most chapters start with headlines that are going on. Like, so almost every chapter you're hearing the headlines in the news around either a shooting or a bombing or an attack in some way, and you're always being reminded of the violence that all these people are living their ordinary lives in. Like, they're just going about their day-to-day life, but they're constantly living in this state of violence. But yeah, I just thought this book was absolutely excellent, and I will read whatever Louise Kennedy brings out next because I really, really enjoyed this. So that is it for my favourite books of the year. Have you read any of these books? I would love to know. Thank you guys so much for watching as always, and I'll see you guys again next time.